It has been almost 3 years since I built these two do-it-yourself garden grow towers. The outdoor grow towers have worked beautifully with only a small amount of changes. However, there have been some issues that I've wanted to address and improve on. The first issue with the design was doing monthly cleanings of the reservoirs. Once the tower was in place and there were plants in it, removal of the tower to clean the reservoir between water changeouts was extremely difficult. The next issue was attributed to the cheap totes I used as reservoirs for the second tower build. It is not uncommon to have 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts here in the Nevada desert. Unfortunately, the lids of these totes were sometimes not strong enough to support the base of the towers in the high winds without being secured at the top with support line. You can also see here that the patio was constructed to slope down for drainage during monsoon rainfall. This made it difficult to keep the towers level. You can also see that the collection of dirt and nutrient solution discolored the white textured skim coating on the patio. In this video, I'm going to address these nagging issues. The plan is to build a small wooden platform under the grow towers. The platform will contain strong supports to hold the towers in place from the high winds without any tide supports. The reservoirs will be moved to the right side of the platform. This should make them much easier to access and clean. The towers will be connected to the reservoir with 2-inch PVC pipe for recirculation. Finally, 1/2-inch PVC pipe will be connected to the pump and placed through the return pipe where the water will be pushed up the tower feed line to the drip cap at the top of the tower. First, I will begin by building the frame for the outdoor platform. I will start by cutting pressure-treated 2x6s and 2x4s to the correct length. Next, I will begin to lay out and assemble the platform frame. 3.5-inch deck screws will be used to hold the frame and floorboard supports together. I will use only 2x4s for the floor support since this platform does not need to support the weight of multiple people. It also lowers the cost of the project as well. 2 of the floor supports will be used to also support each tower. Here I am determining the best locations for both towers and installing them accordingly. The positioning for the supports for each tower took a little bit of planning. I needed to take into consideration distance between each towers as well as leaving a straight run for the PVC return line for each tower to its reservoir. Because of the uneven slope of the patio for drainage in this area, making sure the platform frame was always level was extremely important during this build. The support I'm installing here will also be used to support the storage box that will cover the reservoirs. Next, I will build the wood supports that will attach to the frame to hold each tower strongly in place. For this, I will construct a wood box around the tower using 2x6s and 2x4s. I also used the jigsaw to notch out a small space so that the 2-inch return line can connect to the tower under the floor supports. Here is what the mount looks like completed. Here I've installed the tower support to the frame. The result was a very strong support for the tower. With this support, the tower can now easily be pulled out for cleaning. To keep the cost of this project down, I decided to use one of the 2 5x5 vinyl fence posts for my first grow tower design. Before I can reuse this tower, I need to make some modifications and repairs. I also like to add a fresh layer of epoxy around each of the net cup holders each year to make sure that the tower is leak-free throughout the grow season. Here I am adding a layer of Gorilla Glue epoxy around the sides of the net cup holders. After letting the epoxy dry for an hour, I will then rotate and glue the next side of the tower. Next, I'm going to measure, mark, and drill a hole for the 2-inch PVC fitting that will connect the tower to the reservoir. Here you can see a close-up of the hole after it was drilled. You can also see where I replaced a section which was cut out from the previous design. For this repair, I clamped a piece of scrap vinyl under the cutout and then it layered epoxy on top to mold it in place. I also filled in a hole which was used for the feed line in the previous design. Here I already siliconed the 2-inch PVC fitting in the hole I drilled for the return line. I'm going to test fit the feed line that runs through the center of the tower to the drip cap. Since water from the pump is low pressure, you can simply slip the PVC fittings on without using any PVC glue. Here I am test fitting the length of the 1/2-inch feed line with the shower cap attached to the top of the tower. Each of the 2 reservoirs also needs holes drilled for the connection of the return line. After the hole is drilled, I use food-safe aquarium silicone to seal the 2-inch PVC fitting in place. Here is the fitting after being inserted. The walls of this tote I use for the reservoir are thin, so I also put some epoxy around the outside of the fitting to keep the silicone seal from breaking. For the second reservoir, I will do the same procedure, but for this reservoir, I decided to purchase a 15-gallon cooler from Walmart for $28. The main reason for this experiment is because the temperature of the water in the reservoir quickly rises above the optimal temperature of 70 degrees as early as March. This cuts off my spring growing season by mid-April when outside air temperatures are already in the high 90s. My hopes with this cooler is that I can keep the water temperature down longer and extend my spring growing through May or even June. Now we can test fit the tower mount, reservoir, and PVC lines. Here is an overhead point of view so that you can see how the feed line from the pumps fit through the return line, which is connected to the reservoir. The float valve that you see on the side of the reservoir was installed on the old tower design to keep the reservoirs topped off when I was away on vacation last year, but this is not being used at this time. Now I filled the reservoir with 5 gallons of water. At this time, everything looks good and there does not seem to be any leaks to worry about. Now I'm back to finishing the platform frame. I first need to replace the temporary height supports with 4x4s, which I've already painted white. Now that I've cut the 4x4 with the correct angle to match the slope of the patio, I can screw it in place. After which I can now remove the temporary support. I will then repeat the same process for the other 3 supports. It's now time to install the second tower mount to the platform frame. Next, it's time to install the platform floorboarding. Typically, I would use 5/4 by 6-inch pressure treated deck boarding, except this size is out of stock and impossible to find within 50 miles of Las Vegas. The reason seems to be related to the COVID pandemic.
The lumber industry is struggling with so many people taking on home improvement projects.
Instead of waiting for months for the correct lumber, I decided to use 1x4 pine. Since this lumber is untreated, I need to coat it several times with white paint to keep it from drying out and cracking in the high desert heat. Now that the floorboard has been cut and painted, I've laid out all the pieces on top of the frame for installation. I used 1/4-inch deck spacers to maintain equal spaces between each board. 2-inch deck screws are used to fasten the boards in place. Here I'm cutting a notch so that the tower can fit tightly through the floorboarding. Moving on, the next part of this project is to build the storage box that will cover the reservoirs and the control box. I want the boards on the front and sides of the box to meet up without seeing a cut side. To do this, I will need to set my chop saw at a 45-degree angle. I will then cut both ends of the front-facing boards. Next, I will cut a 45-degree angle on the smaller boards, which I will use for the sides. And here I am assembling one of the sides using a 1x1 to hold them in place. Here I am completing the installation of one of the sides of the storage box. From this view, you can see how the sides fit into place. Next, I install the front boards of the storage box. After the front and sides are in place, I will now work on constructing the lid for the top of the box. Here I'm using wood putty to fill in the screw holes of the storage enclosure before touching it up with white paint. Now that the enclosure for the reservoir is complete, it's time to install the first tower and check for leaks. To do this, I first need to remove a few deck boards. I will now place the tower back in the mount. Then I will screw the mount back into the frame supports and tighten the screws. I will now insert the feed line from the pump to the tower through the inside of the return line and connect them to the tower and reservoir. While everything is connected now, it's time to do another test to make sure there are no leaks. Although I don't feel any water dripping down the PVC pipe or any of the connections, I do feel that the patio underneath and around where the tower is lying is now damp. After some further checks, I've determined that the 5x5 fence cap that fits inside the fence post is what is leaking, even though I sealed it with a ton of silicone. I will replace it with a cap that attaches on the outside. For this, I will again use Aquarian silicone and then slide the cap in place. Now that the silicone is dry and I've installed the tower again, I'm now ready to test for leaks. This time, there are no leaks. At this time, I've now also completed the installation of the plumbing for the second tower. Now I will replace the floorboards that I removed to access the plumbing. Since I used 17-point ceramic deck screws to hold the floorboards in place, removing and replacing these few boards is quick and easy. Here you can see how the water evenly drips down from the shower cap, splashing each net cup holder as it falls. And now here you see it completed and just in time to start the fall grow season. I've already moved my seedlings, a few varieties of pepper plants that I kept growing through the summer, and some plants I purchased from my local nursery into both towers. You can see I use cuttings of pool noodles instead of 3-inch net cups to support the plants in the net cup holders. I do this because I found that the roots of many plants will ball up inside of the tower, and removing them at the end of the growing season often causes the net cup holder to break off. The total cost of supplies for this upgrade was just over $200. In the upcoming weeks, I will also try to figure out how I can add supports to hold the cover for the plants for the few nights in January when the temperatures may fall down into freezing. In previous years, I simply threw a car cover over each tower, which worked well. However, getting it tied properly without damaging the plants proved to be challenging. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will be alerted when I publish updates on my fall grow as well as updates to this project as well. As far as the plants I will be growing this fall, I selected multiple varieties of peppers, strawberries, burgundy pole beans, broccoli, spinach, and cucumbers. Larger plants like broccoli and tomatoes and peppers will be moved to the second tower where the nutrients will be much higher and there is a fence that I can use as a trellis to support them better. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Please be sure to check the video description for additional notes on this build and feel free to send me any questions and comments. Thank you for watching.